You gave your heart to the one man who made you believe again, and then, just when it felt real, he disappeared like you never mattered at all. No explanation, no closure, just silence. Today, I'm sharing the 4 things a man will do when he truly loves you right before he vanishes. These aren't red flags. They're actually proof his feelings became so intense, his unconscious mind started planning his escape. I'm Vernon. I've learned that the most confusing abandonment isn't born from indifference. It's born from love so consuming it terrifies the man feeling it. If you've ever asked yourself, how could someone love me so fully, then leave me so suddenly? This video will finally give you answers. Not to get him back, but to understand that his disappearance says nothing about your worth and everything about his inability to handle what he awakened in himself. Take a moment to like and subscribe so you won't miss the kind of insight that strengthens emotional connection and brings lasting love into your life, especially after 60, when depth matters more than ever. So, let's begin with the first thing he does, not to deceive you, but to protect himself from a love that feels too real, too vulnerable, too much. 1. He lets you into his private world, then fears losing control. There's a quote by Joseph Campbell I often think about when I talk to women about intimacy. He said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." For men, that cave is emotional exposure. And when he finally lets you in, what comes next can feel just as terrifying as it is precious. Sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest pasts. Teresa told me about Jameson, 58, steady, thoughtful. But it wasn't until their 3rd month together that he let his guard down and let her see what he'd hidden from everyone else. He spoke about his father's disappointment when he chose art over business. He showed her sketches from his youth, dreams he'd buried under decades of responsibility. He even cried, talking about his mother's death, something he'd never done, not even at her funeral. Teresa felt honored, chosen. She thought this vulnerability meant they were building something unshakable. But within 2 weeks of these intimate revelations, Jameson began creating distance. He stopped calling as frequently, became vague about future plans, and eventually said he needed space to figure things out. What Teresa didn't understand, what most women don't understand, is that for many men, vulnerability feels like losing control. When a man shows you his wounds, his fears, his secret dreams, he's not just sharing information. He's handing you power over the parts of himself he spent a lifetime protecting. This creates what I call emotional whiplash. The same intimacy that drew him to open up now feels dangerous. He begins to see you not as his sanctuary, but as a witness to his weakness. And rather than risk further exposure, he retreats into the familiar territory of emotional isolation. The tragic irony: his withdrawal isn't proof that his feelings were false. It's proof they were overwhelmingly real. What experiences have you had with men who shared deeply, then suddenly pulled away? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments below. You've seen his heart. He's opened up, shared what no one else has. But what happens when he not only lets you in, he starts building his world around you? Can you guess his next action when love begins to feel like losing himself?
2. He prioritizes you in subtle but serious ways, then panics. When a man starts centering his decisions around your needs, your schedule, your happiness, he's not just being loving. He's dismantling the fortress of self-reliance he's spent decades building. Men of our generation were often taught that independence equals strength. This creates a cruel paradox. The deeper a man loves, the more ashamed he may feel of that love. Society taught him that real men don't need anyone, that emotional dependence is feminine weakness. Abraham Maslow once said something that explains this perfectly. We fear our highest possibility. We are generally afraid to become that which we can glimpse in our most perfect moments. And for many men, loving someone completely represents both their highest possibility and their greatest fear. When he finds himself rearranging his world around you, part of him sees it as a betrayal of his masculine identity. He starts seeing his devotion as weakness, his attentiveness as dependence. The withdrawal that follows isn't calculated cruelty. It's a desperate attempt to reclaim the independence he fears he's lost. I once worked with a gentleman named Clark, who perfectly illustrated this pattern. He rearranged his entire life around a woman he'd been seeing for 4 months. He declined his Thursday poker games to have dinner with her. He remembered her coffee order, her sister's birthday, the way she liked her apartment temperature. He even postponed a fishing trip with his son to help her move furniture. But this level of prioritization scared him more than any business deal or life challenge ever had. Clark began to panic, not because he didn't love her, but because he did. So completely that he could feel himself disappearing into the relationship. The woman he loved interpreted his growing distance as rejection, never understanding that Clark wasn't rejecting her. He was rejecting the version of himself that needed her so desperately. This pattern of devotion, followed by withdrawal, reveals something profound about how men process deep emotional attachment. But there's one final behavior that might be the most heartbreaking of all. When a man who loves you begins preparing for a life where you're better off without him.
3. He starts imagining your life without him and silently withdraws. This final pattern might be the most heartbreaking because it disguises itself as nobility while destroying the very love it claims to protect. When a man begins preparing for your life without him, he's not losing interest. He's convinced himself that his absence is the greatest gift he can give you. I've witnessed this self-sacrificial withdrawal countless times in my years of counseling. A man who loves deeply will suddenly stop making plans beyond next week. He'll encourage you to spend more time with friends, especially that divorced neighbor who seems like a good guy. He'll start asking subtle questions about what you want in a partner, as if he's conducting market research for his own replacement. There's a truth that captures this perfectly. Some men disappear not because they stopped loving, but because they think you deserve someone who won't. This twisted logic becomes their emotional reality. What's happening is a form of preemptive emotional sacrifice. He's decided, without consulting you, that his baggage, his wounds, his limitations make him unworthy of your love. Maybe he wakes up at 3 a.m. thinking about his ex-wife. Maybe he feels too old, too damaged, too set in his ways. Whatever the reason, he appoints himself judge and jury of his own worth and sentences himself to absence. The woman experiences this as rejection, as him losing interest. She can't see that his growing distance is actually his twisted way of loving her. In his mind, he's being noble, selfless, clearing the path for someone who won't disappear when things get difficult. This is perhaps the most devastating pattern, because the decision is made unilaterally, without giving you the chance to choose. These men don't disappear because they're selfish. They disappear because they're convinced their love isn't enough, that their presence somehow limits your potential for happiness. Until now, you understood something you couldn't quite name before, so you can save this video. You may need to revisit it, especially on days when you start questioning your worth because of someone else's disappearance. Long before the goodbye, some men start preparing for it in silence, not because they stopped loving you, but because they started doubting themselves. That's where the next pattern begins. 4. He questions if he can make you happy, then begins to fade quietly. Not every man leaves because he's unsure of how he feels about you. Sometimes he walks away because he's convinced you'll eventually realize he was never enough. This kind of quiet unraveling doesn't come with slamming doors or long emotional goodbyes. It arrives gently, in silence. I know because I was that man once. I loved a woman deeply, someone who saw me clearly, supported me quietly, and brought light into parts of my life I didn't know were dark. With her, everything felt safe and easy. Long walks, cooking together, even just sharing space in silence felt like home. And that's exactly when the panic started. I began asking her questions I disguised as curiosity, but they were really just fears I didn't know how to name. Are you sure you're happy with someone like me? Don't you ever wonder what it'd be like to be with someone more impressive? She'd smile, say yes, remind me she chose me for a reason, but her reassurance never quieted the noise in my head. Every compliment made me feel like an imposter. Every "I love you" felt like pressure to become a man I wasn't sure I could be. So I started doing what many men do when we're overwhelmed with silent shame. I drifted. I didn't stop loving her. I just stopped showing up fully, convinced that my leaving early would hurt her less than staying too long and disappointing her. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't her standards I couldn't meet. It was my own belief that I had to become someone else just to deserve the love she gave so freely. So if you've ever loved a man who slowly faded, not with anger, but with guilt, please know it wasn't about your worth. Sometimes we don't leave because we don't care. We leave because we're scared to be seen loving you and still feel like we'll fail you. And that fear, if never spoken aloud,
can quietly destroy something beautiful before either of you understand why. I wonder what might have happened if I had simply told her the truth, that I wasn't pulling away because she lacked anything, but because I didn't believe I had enough to give. Maybe if I had said, "I'm scared I'm not good enough for you," she would have held my hand and said, "You don't have to be more, just be honest." But like many men raised to equate worth with achievement, I thought love had to be earned, proven, sustained through constant doing, not just being. So instead of leaning in, I leaned out. I canceled dinner. I stopped sharing stories. I made myself less available, hoping she'd find someone better before she realized I wasn't. It was cowardly, but in my mind, it felt like mercy. Only now do I see. The most painful betrayal isn't in what we do, it's in what we hide. And I hid everything except the love. These 4 patterns of emotional withdrawal reveal something profound about masculine vulnerability and the fear of emotional intensity. Understanding them isn't about getting him back. It's about recognizing that his disappearance reflects his limitations, not your worth.
Right now, we've explored 4 quiet but powerful signs of a man in emotional conflict. First, he opens his heart and then suddenly pulls away. Next, he begins to center his world around you, only to panic when his feelings grow too deep. And finally, he steps back, not because the love is gone, but because he believes you deserve more than he can offer. These actions don't reflect your worth. They reflect his struggle with emotions he was never taught to handle, and a love that feels as terrifying as it is real. Your job isn't to fix him, chase him, or prove your value. It's to recognize that his leaving says more about his limitations than it does about your lovability. If you've lived this pattern, understand this. The problem wasn't that you loved too deeply. It's that he wasn't ready to hold what you had to give. A man who disappears after loving you deeply isn't a villain. He's a wounded soul doing the best he can with the tools he has. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let him go. Knowing his absence clears the way for someone who won't run from your depth. Do you have a question, a personal insight, or a story of your own? I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share it in the comments below. And before you go, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss powerful insights on love and emotional connection, especially after 60. And I'm Vernon. Thanks for watching my video.